Welcome. I'll be speaking about 150 years history of psychiatry and also give you a short overview of the brain and the mind. Psychiatric diseases have been defined as a brain disease by Wilhelm Griesinger, who is a great German psychiatrist. In this half of 19th century, Griesinger identified mental diseases as the brain diseases. Griesinger actually, when said that mental diseases are brain diseases, he didn't actually confined everything in a single concept. He opposed to moral approach and somatic approach. He said that this disease can be seen in different organs, which is related to the attitude and religion. And at the same time, two neuropsychiatrists, neurologists, Theodor Meinert, defined mental diseases as frontal brain diseases.
Var, çok teşekkür ederim.
And Meinert is a great neurologist who identified encephalopathy. And Karl Jaspers, who mentioned in his famous book, used another term by ridiculing his predecessors, and he spoke of these diseases as brain mythologies. In 1880s and 1910, in the United States, except for a few university clinics, all remaining clinics, the psychiatry professors were psychoanalysts. Carl Baum, like a century ago, identified catatonia as a brain disease. However, Bleuler, under the influence of Freud, or too much impressed by Freud, said that Schnauzkrampf actually identified contraction of muscles around the mouth as disgust. So this is not a disorder of motor device, but this is a disorder of the will. And after ACHT, after rheumatoid diseases are treated by ACHT, psychiatrists stated that depression is related to the fact that they get rid of diseases, so they couldn't get ill. That is why they are depressed. There are two important discoveries in biological psychiatry. One of them is the understanding that schizophrenia or psychiatric diseases have genetic components. So without a doubt, schizophrenia or bipolar disorders, there are genetic components according to the studies in Scandinavia and in the United States. And the second discovery for biological psychiatry, starting from 1949, within a short period of time, lithium and chlorpromazine, imipramine, and diazepam's discovery. These drugs, by the way, are older than nearly everyone in the hall. And after that time, it wasn't possible to develop new drugs. In 1960s, interestingly, anti-psychiatry came to the fore. Thomas Suss is a legend. He wrote the book of mental disease. So when psychiatric diseases are considered as brain diseases, it should be neurologist's job to deal with them. So, or let me put it that way, brain diseases should be handled by neurologists. And at the same time, Miloš Forman's One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest movie was there, and it was also very influential. Why psychopharmacology's development was not that fast? Biological paradigm in 1960s, in 1970s, the deriving force was psychopharmacology. However, this is based on etiologic complexity. There are two drugs, varenicline and esketamine, which were devised as not as antidepressants, but a few months ago it was approved by FDA. Why psychopharmacology is not developing in the desired pace? Animal models are designed to find and catch D2 receptor. If you are to detect that, then it means that this is psychotic, and if it's not possible, it's not psychotic. So it's a circular reasoning. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's a new model, a new animal model, but it couldn't be developed. And pharmacologists working in the drug industry, field of drug industry, when there is no dopaminergic effect, they are antipsychotics, but they couldn't make their superiors believe in that. So clozapine was withdrawn from market in 1975, then reintroduced under restricted conditions in 1990s. As a result, since 1959, antipsychotics have been developed, and they were not very different from one another. In the end of 18 months, whether the patients are using old drugs or the new drugs, 3/4 of the patients discontinued therapy, and the new drugs were found to be not superior to the older ones. So these paradigms, psychopharmacology paradigm, is based on that background. At the time, when it comes to modern nosology, towards the end of 1950s in the US, in St. Louis University, a group of psychiatrists studied psychosis diagnosis in the US and identified that it was easier in the US to diagnose psychosis and similar psychiatric diseases when compared to the other parts of the world. So reliability and validity For reliability and validity, they started developing nosology, and with that system, cognitive, behavioral, and emotional functions, there was a categoric differentiation among them. And that system, by Weiner and research diagnostic criteria and DSM's development, were founded upon this phenomenon. But in 2007, Andreasen's report in Schizophrenia Bulletin, who was very young at that time, in respect of DSM, he made some warnings, and he stated that in the introduction part of DSM-3, that manual is not the final authority, and the categories were not sufficiently valid. They can be considered as reliable, but for diagnosis, their validity of the diagnosis is not there, and DSM measures are not sufficient. Take their history and listen to your patients. Although it's there in the intro part of DSM-3, within 10 or 15 years, in the US and all around the world, including Turkey, DSM-3 and in the other publications, without any criticism, were accepted as the final authority, and DSM has become a textbook in the hands of the assistants. Important and interesting. For instance, those who prepared DSM considered it as a gatekeeper. So these are the minimum standards, but they shouldn't be sufficient. And within time, psychiatry became poorer. Andreasen said that if psychiatry goes like that, silent psychiatry goes like that, then it will become a silent spring, by making reference to a famous book. And DSM made psychiatry dehumanized psychiatry. And third wave, biological psychiatry. The second wave, psychopharmacology and genetics. The classical genetics, family genetics, I mean. The first wave, in the 20th century, the last 20 years of 20th century, 1980s and onwards, molecular neuroscience is the biggest research program all around the world in the last 20 years. It's not by changing the neurotransmitter levels of drugs in synaptic spaces, but by changing the receptors and new neurons. It's identified that in the dentate gyrus of hippocampus, there are new neurons that are affecting. And while studying biology in the medical school, we were taught that there are not new neurons. However, we have learned that it is possible to create new neurons in the brain, and the first human fMRI study was performed in 1991. These studies were performed on healthy subjects, and then comes imaging genetics, epigenetics, optogenetics, like by using light. They silenced some genes, and deep brain stimulation. There were new opportunities. So these, I believe, are defining, some authors believe that they are defining it. What is biological psychiatry? There are many meanings to that. This slide was used by me last year. It establishes a bond between psychiatry and brain biology. So if we say that everyone in this hall are biological psychiatrists, however, psychiatric illnesses are brain illnesses. If we diminish it, or if we say like that, this is something else. Even the strictest biological psychiatrists don't think like that, because there are different effective treatment methods. Psychiatric diseases in the near future will be identified as neurologic diseases and will be treated. Maybe Professor Errol would call it an epistemologic dissolution. There is a need for a new medical model. It's been there for some time, a model that is known as biomedical model. Nearly all of us know that model. Engel in 1977 proposed it in the Science journal. In the West and all around the world, it stated that the disease is a dominant folk model. I recommend you to read that. So eclecticism and anarchism, even if it's criticized, this article can be considered as a first. And Engel stated that the church 500 years ago let people display their bodies. So the church said that do not touch the soul, but you can use the body however you like. So that dualism and that dualism's effect is there in the Western science. So if we have time, we can discuss about that. In 1989, when this was published,
Bu nozolojinin yeniden kurucularından
Samuel Guze, one of the most important reinventors of biological psychiatry, in Psychological Medicine in 1989, he published a very striking article about is there any other type of psychiatry. And then comes the article of Andre Hansen in 1997. So he reduced them to more biomedical terminology and phenomeноtype, and he used it to find phenomeноtype or biotype. In 1997, he was very enthusiastic, but he lost his enthusiasm in his article titled "The Death of Nosology," which was published in a journal in the USA. In the same year, Eric Kandel, who won Nobel Award, stated that the sophisticated understanding of the issue should be kept and included in neuroscience. He has made a warning to the profession of psychiatry, and these warnings are both from within and also exist there for a long time. Now I'll speak about RDoC program and the founding fathers of that program, and to make you understand better the modern paradigm. Incel and Kurian. Incel is the president of NIJM in the US and Kurian in Canada. They co-authored an article and stating that the future psychiatrists will be neuroscientists. So psychiatrists and neurologists can be identified as the best clinical neuroscientists. But they don't refrain from making such warnings. While asserting or making their case or resting their case, they focus on the fact that the main point of interest of psychiatry will be the deeply understanding of human soul.
Gelecekte de etkili bir tedavicinin
And psychotherapies will be also used as tools, as effective tools. So psychiatry and medicine, it will be combined with other disciplines, but psychiatry involvement in medicine, then psychiatric diseases will no longer be stigmatizing people. That's what they wished for. So in a few minutes, I will be speaking about what these developments bring and what they do not provide. GWAS method and the use of GWAS method is very important, because candidate gene studies, despite the effort and money spent, did not show any responsible gene. And in expensive diseases, genetic contribution was found to be very low. Then biological changes could not be translated into treatment. For instance, amyloid beta antibodies or gamma sectorase inhibitors. These genetic developments, discoveries could be used, but with evoking the plasticity of brain, psychologic therapies were found to be possible. So if you have an effect on the brain plasticity, then psychologic therapies would be more effective on that basis. I'll skip that one. Epigenetics. Epigenetics undoubtedly stated that environmental impacts are creating some changes, and this was published in Neuroscience. Rats which were cared for better by their mother and which were catered for more by their mother, licked by their mother, are giving less reaction to stress because there is a reduction of methylation. So their glucocorticoid receptors are more or higher in well-cared rats, and it also means that they are more resilient to stress. So in the human studies, in the later human studies, we have identified that environmental factors have some effects on genomes, human genomes. Functional imaging. Psychiatric diseases do not have pathognomonic neuropathology. So when brain mythology term was used by Jaspers, he meant that. But if there is no causal structural pathology, there must be a functional pathology. fMRI studies in 1991 started in healthy volunteers. I think that Professor Kemal will develop on them in detail. So they all validated what we have learned from lesion studies. When there's a lesion at the time of Broca, we knew that lesions are causing problems, and we know which lesion is causing which problem. So which brain parts, regions were needed were shown to us. But fMRI studies showed or could show which parts are sufficient. So I use could because this is not agreed by everybody. After examining normal functions, fMRI was applied to abnormal functions and identified as a window opening to the brain, and that window was accepted to shed light on psychopathologies. So fMRI is not something that we use for brain activity. Bolt signal is changing among the subjects. So it's different for me, it's different for you, and in the same session it's different for different people. So that bolt signal, advanced mathematics is used to define that, but we have to know it. Signal noise area is low in behavioral, in cognitive areas. So when you want the patient to get his thumb move closer to his face, then bolt signal is high, and you need to find large samples. You have to repeat the experiment, you have to repeat it, you have to repeat everything, and there is the cost issue. Brain's functioning points to certain functions. So working memory homework is related to prefrontal cortex. However, if a person is watching something on the screen and there is a noise of 100 decibels and the patient might be hungry, confined in a small space, all these have an effect, and in order to eliminate their effect, images are taken during cognitive homeworks, and these images have to be derived from those taken at the resting state. But considering that they are doing the same things during resting state, then many areas that are examined might get lost. fMRI studies have three problems. which homeworks should you focus on or should you work on. And power. Power means statistical power, and the strongest one was about 8 or 10 studies. And analysis method. The analysis method, according to your analysis method, you have so many findings, but these findings may change. And imaging the functions or activities in the brain, having a panic attack or having hallucinations. What does it mean to have panic attack or hallucinations? It doesn't contribute to that. But in reality, it does not enable you to tell pathologic situation or incident from the normal, ordinary, physiologic process. So by looking at image, you cannot tell the difference, no matter how detailed it is. A biological indicator does not tell what the anxiety or the problem is about. Is it about an anxiety related to her child or her past regrets? So when you remove it from the actual life experience, then its effect becomes limited. Despite all these shortcomings, fMRI made a significant change. So it has become the main tools for cognitive neuroscience, and localizationist approach has no longer been there. We started thinking about the brain circuits and their meanings. At the beginning, law was identified in ACC or gut point or schizophrenia gene were found. They were all published in the newspapers or media, but some self-criticism or articles of self-criticism were published one by one. Cognitive psychology feeds specified or privatized modules. The modules are interconnected. For instance, you put a letter to the screen and want the patient to tell words starting with A, then sight context and side cortex helps you to see the letter, and the dorsolateral frontal cortex is active and the Broca area is active. So is it superior to box and arrow diagrams? So the images, the colorful images might be so appealing, but are they any superior? Which region is involved, and knowing which region is involved doesn't mean that it will show you the reasons of why this happened. When combined with other studies, only then could we know what they are doing. Translating the cognitive psychology methods to psychiatry may seem something superficial. Will you please wrap up, Professor Kazım? Please give me a few minutes, and then I'll complete. There are neural sufficiency assumptions. In many cases, environment doesn't only an input, but main part of cognitive functions. In Scrabble game, we put the letters and try to organize new words which are helping us to remember some other words. We are forming a word, while forming them we remember new ones. So cognitive function disorders should be seen as having environmental factors. What is needed to be done is to have a functional organization of psychiatric diseases within the framework of cognitive neuropsychology. So with behavioral or psychological terminology, patients may be acting in a dysfunctional manner. So that's all from my part. If you have any questions or comments, thank you.